see if I can handle all this equipment at the same time. This presentation is not about the common framework as such. I guess at least our European colleagues knows quite well what the common framework is about. For those who were in the room in the last session, we also got this presentation from Finland, touching slightly the content and some of the experiences with the common framework. And also tomorrow at the Industrial Day, the common framework will be presented and discussed in the parallel session B, starting at 11:45, so there you can get more insight about the common framework as such. So, I will, in this presentation, give you the objectives for doing this study. We need to bring to the table some definitions on interoperability, some words about how we actually did do this study, which frameworks, other frameworks than common framework we addressed, and the findings and conclusions. The paper is written together with Jannike Westerheim from Viva, sitting on the back row. So you can shoot half at me and half at her if I say something wrong. So, what was our objective? If you as a scientific approach, start to read scientific papers from different journals, you very often run into the situation that if you start with the business-oriented papers, in our case logistics, you will see that there is a discussion on organization, on performance, things like that. And then, at least in the latter years, you slowly move into how different kind of technologies can actually help you to fulfill your objectives with your business. On the other side, you can go to the more technology-oriented papers, and then you will have good descriptions of new technology, possibilities, restrictions in the technology, and then slowly moving towards how it can be applied in logistics, in healthcare, in whatever. But often there is a little mismatch. So we try in this study to first look at, okay, how are the supply chains actually changing? So what we saw, they are becoming more complex. And also, if you look at older papers and all the descriptions of supply chain management, you can see that there are kind of longer parts in a supply chain. What you can see now when you read is like you are cutting all the processes in the supply chain into smaller parts. And the idea is that by having smaller parts, you are more flexible. But of course that introduces the need for efficient communication between those smaller parts in the supply chain. If you look at the development in technology, I was discussing with my son, he's 15 years old now, and I discovered when he was born, we hardly knew what the internet was. That's only 15 years ago. So the latter years, the change in information and communication technology is quite fantastic. Especially this device that we all are carrying around. It's possible for us, more or less everywhere in Europe on the land side, to be connected. And the technology itself has evolved so that you can say that we have a kind of infrastructure in the bottom, not only physical communication, but also a lot of standards for information exchange, meaning that I, with my iPhone, having a Norwegian service provider, can easily send a text message to my Greek colleague having a Nokia, no problem. So the technical infrastructure is there, and also some of the information exchange infrastructure. But still, if that was the case, then we should be happy because we could easily exchange information also in supply chain management. And we know that is not the case. So we need to work further on interconnectivity and interoperability. And if you go to the literature, you see that there are several frameworks for interoperability. Some of them are quite technical, some of them are quite generic, and some of them are more specific for one sector in this complex world, for example, for logistics. And in the latter years, we have been working with this common framework. In Norway, we have worked for 15 years now with the framework we call Arctrans. And then I think it was in 2008 in Lausanne, before we invented the name ICITL, there were several research projects that came together and made a common understanding that it would be nice if several European projects addressing information exchange in logistics could agree upon a common framework to be used. So that was the start of the common framework. And we have been using it in several research projects, and not least it has been presented. For those who have been to several of these conferences every year, you have seen a lot of presentations of what the common framework can do for you. So what Yannick and I thought was, it could be nice to take a little step back and actually try to evaluate some of the qualities in the common framework up front of these other frameworks to see, can it actually offer something more or something else to support interoperability in what I call transport logistics. So that is the background and motivation for this study. So, some definitions. Technical interoperability. This one is taken from the IEEE community. So they say that technical interoperability is the ability of two or more systems or components to exchange information and to use information that has been exchanged. Doesn't say anything about how it should be used or what should be the purpose of using it. But if my system A is able to connect to system B and exchange information and also use it for some purpose, you, by this definition, have the technical interoperability in place. Again, if you compare to the mobile phones, they don't ask me what I want to write in my message to my wife or to my son, but it's saying it's possible. So, the next definition is more interesting. That is taken from a paper written by some ladies, Legner and Lebreton. It's from 2007, saying that business level interoperability is the organizational and operational ability of an enterprise to connect, to cooperate with its business partners, and to efficiently establish, conduct, and develop IT-supported business relationships with the objective to create value. I think the last part of the definition is quite important. There must be some objectives of this exchange of information. Another thing is also this small letter. It's not with your one business partner, but it is with your business partners. And again, as I said, when the logistics or the supply chain stakeholders are getting more and they have smaller responsibility and handling smaller parts, the numbers of partners, of possible partners, is raising. Meaning that, as in the older days when you had these ADI solutions, you could take long time together with your 1, 2 or 3 business partners to develop your specific solution on how to work together by means of ICT. You cannot do that if you have a possible number of 100, 200, 600 business partners and you know almost nothing about them and how they actually perform their own business. So, we looked at both these definitions. So, how did we do this study? It was twofold. We had to collect the knowledge about frameworks, about supply chain management, changes in business models, changes in processes, and also changes in technology. So for that purpose, we did a literature review where we used sources like Web of Science. We picked out our search terms and did collect possible papers. If you do a Google search, you know that the number is, the returning number of hits are very often quite high, which also was the case. So one thing we did was to say, okay, we are interested only in the newer papers. What they did write about ICT logistics in 1985 was not very interesting. So we looked at mostly the papers written after 2010, 2012. For the common framework, it is a little bit different since we have been involved at different levels in the development of the common framework. So for extracting knowledge of that process, we were using the action research approach. So that was to collect the information, and then we did, I should have written a theoretical case study to go through the different frameworks, look at the qualities, and try to link them to the changes in supply chain management and processes, things like that. So, addressing this interoperability, oh, I need this pointer. When you read about these different frameworks and different approaches, one of the things that I saw very early when we looked at this was one way or the other, it's very often in levels. You have different levels. This first picture is taken from the work we have done in a huge European project for several years called Easyway, which is about deploying ITS services in the European road network. But the interesting thing is that this proposed triangle says that you need interoperability at different levels. And of course, you have the processes or the business level on the top. And again, referring to the mobile phone, you need some interoperability in the bottom to be able to actually have it on the top. The next triangle is taken from the ArcTrans model and is also leveled. That to say, on the top you have some overall concepts trying to divide the transport area into smaller areas, aligning them with roles, and then defining or describing functions and information structures needed to make a cooperation work. This one, I guess, for the logistics people are quite known. It's taken from the SCORE model, where you have quite you have several levels, but you have a quite strict process. You have the plan, source, make, and deliver processes. But interesting levels, and we can then discuss should it be 3, 4, 7 levels, but mid levels, so we can work top down or bottom up. We looked at two, I call it generic frameworks for interoperability. Oh, sorry. There we go. The Athena interoperability framework is very generic, mainly addressing semantic, almost for all sectors. And the same with the SCIF IRIS framework is describing interoperability at a lower level. And the SCORE model, as I just showed you, is for logistics, having this plan, source, make, deliver, and also return processes in focus. And this one is not very technical. It's business level oriented. And then we were looking at the common framework. So what we found in this study was that these generic frameworks, they are often linked to information and communication technology. And since they are some years older, they take on board, how to phrase it in English, they have a very determined view upon how the technology should be used. So you could say they are not very innovative. They try to utilize technology in a very given way. And they don't actually reflect any specific needs of the logistics or transport logistics sectors. They say that if you are a company in a sector, you should do this and this with technology to make sure that you can communicate with your business partners. And of course, whatever sector you look at, something will always be the same. Like for instance, every sector in one way or the other need to connect to the bank sector today. Then again, the SCORE model is different because that is not linked very much to technology, but it's very linked to the logistics businesses. But one of the drawbacks with this model is that it assumes a certain way of organizing logistics. So you could say that it's not too innovative either. And the common framework, one of the characteristics there is that it's very top-down. It's not based in any technology. So, some of our conclusions then is that the common framework is addressing the overall concepts needed for interoperability in the transport logistics sectors in a more generic way than the other frameworks. On one side, this is a good quality because it means that you don't have to do your business in a specific way. And of course, for a commercial company, one of the unique selling points is very often that I can run my business in a more efficient and better ways than my competitors, meaning that I survive in the business. The drawback is that you end up using generic terms. You have to do that, meaning that, okay, we can have generic terms and then it will be, there are some effort needed to translate it to my business and back again, because I might not in my business system call a pallet exactly the same way as we do in the common framework. Another good quality, especially I think in front of the SCORE model, is that the common framework is not linked to any fixed organization among the stakeholders. It's flexible, so you can actually apply it to different ways of working together. And this point is maybe a little bit dangerous. It's not linked to any specific information and communication technology. You could discuss this as long as we have made most of the information models by means of XML, but you can run common framework information exchange on an iPhone or on a Samsung if you want to do that. So, and for next steps to be looking at, I think it would be, first of all, I haven't written it down, but physical internet. We know that there is a lot of discussions now going on building this ALICE logistics platform with the aim of achieving synchromodality, and even in the more far future, the physical internet. And as we heard also in the beginning of the conference, the physical internet requires that the hubs are actually doing more of the planning for the transportation of the goods from A to B. And again, the hubs will be different, but then they would need some common way of communicating. So I think that would be very interesting to pick up the elements from the common framework and start to compare them with the concepts that are proposed as building blocks for the future physical internet. Another thing is, I think there is a need to maybe critically review the level of content of the common framework, because in the last project, the content of the common framework has become very, very, very detailed. Maybe it's not the right level, maybe it's not at that level the common framework can actually support better interoperability in logistics. I'm not sure, but that could be of interest to do further research on. And the last point is trust and governance. If I run a business, a logistics company in Europe, and 90% of my business is based on exchange of information with all my partners, and someone says you should use the common framework, then you automatically raise the question of trust and governance. If I base my business on the common framework and everything goes wrong, where can I go to get help, to support? Who can support me in doing this? And then I guess it's more safe, for example, to go and use ISO standards for this and for that. And we heard in the presentation before the break that some parts of the common framework are actually now part of UBL and will become ISO in the near future. So part of it, but still, would you put the whole future of your business into the common framework? That's a big question we need to address in the future. So, ending with yellow.